Hi, everybody. Good morning, or good evening, or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world right now. My name is Adi Bitter. I am a Yoetzet Halacha. I taught at Nishmat in their Shen of Arts program and their Technical Elite program for several years. I currently uh, work for Nishmat as a Yoetzet Halacha and also as a Melavat Poriyut. Um, Helping couples navigate the intersections between women's health and halacha in regard to Taharat Mishpacha and things that come up in the context of fertility. I live in Jerusalem, and I'm here with you from Nishmat's building, which is always a lovely place to be. And my talk here is kind of in the middle of the webinar, and I took the liberty of deciding that you'd probably have lots of other shiurim with lots of sources. And I decided to take a kind of different approach, different than what I usually do. I usually like to only teach from sources and to share something more of a personal, different personal reflections on light, specifically in the context of Chanuka. I was inspired to do this by my sister-in-law, Maya Bernstein, who, amongst many other things, is also a poet. She wrote a book of poetry about a year ago, and she invited me to an online poetry reading that she and some other poets were sharing their poetry at online a week ago. And it was very interesting for me to have that experience of letting words of someone else's personal experience wash over me. I was able to say for her very moving poems and also those of Yoshua November. And it was just it was a very moving experience. And something about hearing something read when it's about someone's own deeply personal experience, and noticing those places of commonality and also difference in the way that we engage with other people's personal experiences is something that moved me to do something that I don't usually do. I write letters to my students. That is something that I do periodically. So I'm not speaking about personal letters. Obviously, I respond to emails as well. But every now and then I'm moved to share sentiments with my students. When it's a group of people who know me, who I've had the privilege of learning with for at least a year, I feel comfortable sharing of myself in a way that I generally don't do with people who I can't see on a webinar. But really attending that poetry reading moves me to feel like there is something significant about hearing someone else's way of being in the world. So I decided to share some of those letters. I don't have the three letters that I'm going to share are ones that I've written around this time of year. One over a decade ago, another one 5 years ago, and another one last year. I find that a certain type of clarity/creativity that happens. Sorry, there's just something on the screen here. Okay, sorry. A certain type of clarity or creativity that kind of just bubbles up for me. It happens at different times in my life. I have found that the current state of war has not brought up bountiful amounts of new perspective and creativity. And I have found it interesting and meaningful to turn back to different thoughts that I've had at different points around this time of year. And in as much as in many ways what we're going through now is so unique to me in my lifetime and to us in history, there's also something so not unique about it. Unfortunately, different permutations of the current reality are things that we have experienced. And I'll also say that irrespective of what we're grappling with nationally, I think that each person individually is also, walking that line between either by choice or not. I mean, we're all in the national picture here, and it's something that we all feel in different ways intensely. And that being said, I can speak for myself. It's still the winter and my kids are still getting sick. And I still have to make sandwiches to get them out of the house in the morning. And the mundane is something that continues. So just one thought about Hanukkah before I start my readings that speak about that balance between personal and national. That's something that I read from Rav Lichtenstein, written up by one of his students also many years ago, really speaks about the two elements of the miracle of Hanukkah, the miracle of light that happened very much within the temple, and then the miracle of the war that happened very much outside of the temple, and the question of who was impacted by it. And on the one hand, it's only those who entered the Mikdash who experienced the miracle of the light, and at the same time, the whole point of the light of the temple, physical and metaphorical, is to really emanate outward. And that whole interplay between how do we as individuals spread our own light first and foremost, and also I have felt very much since the beginning of this war that place between the question of my own mikdash ma'at in my own home, and even more internally, bilvavi mishkan evne, like in terms of just me myself. How am I making sure that my light can continue to burn in a way that spreads hope and positivity to others, and can illuminate really everywhere, and how finding the space between that and just the awareness of what is going on the national level. And Rav Lichtenstein speaks of that interplay between making sure that those who are temple focused don't forget the point. The point is to be spreading the light to the nation, and to be deeply connected to the nation. All the metaphors of what light and temple bring, that's really to be emanating outward. And at the same time, the need of the nation to have that connection to the temple, and to recognize that is really such a central source of its light and its force. And I also will just say, so I've chosen to do this kind of a Farbrengen style. I teach at a Chabad institution, and that notion of just taking time sometimes, we have our Gemara class, we learn our sources, we analyze, etc. And then sometimes we just talk about what's on our hearts. And so I'm given the hour, I think in most countries, I decided to go in that route. And I totally lost my train of thought. Anyway, so I'll start with sharing some of the things that I've written during this time of year. One second. So, as I said, these are letters that I've written to my students. The first letter I wrote really one of my first years teaching this population of gap year students. Meaning that year specifically, I was teaching students who came to Israel for a year before continuing on to college. I wrote it when I was a bit over a decade out of college, and now it's a bit over a decade, to students who were at that point in life. It's interesting for me to revisit it, and to at a point in my life that my 19-year-old self was really still very tangible for me. And I share it, right. So this is what I was going to say. I share these things, with the disclaimer that this is just my own personal experience of my life. Whether you take it as something that's thought-provoking or inspirational for you, or whether you just take it as a fascinating look into the world through the eyes of Adi. Take it for what it's worth, and experience it as you wish. I will say that the three pieces are really quite different from each other. The first one is the most different, and interspersed I will also share in terms of my personal journey vis-a-vis my relation. This is all connected somehow to light, my transition throughout them. So this one is really dedicated to all the 19-year-olds out there, and for the 19-year-old piece in all of us, irrespective of our age, to engage with, and for everyone, just in terms of however it hits you. Okay, I'll just also say by way of introduction, I attended uh, I attended Columbia University for my undergraduate degree. I spent my junior year abroad in Israel, and that was during, I believe it was the second one of the Intifadas in the year 2001. I was taking courses in Hebrew. I was in Israel living that Intifada while I heard that back at Columbia, the department that I was a student in, Mideast and Asian languages and cultures, had been that there were professors who were canceling class and having students attend Palestinian sit-ins. There was a documentary made around the same time by one of my classmates called Columbia Unbecoming. There was a whole divestment thing that was going on. The reflections that I'm going to share in this letter that I shared with my students were actually things that were part of my experience my first year at Columbia before any of that happened. But it is interesting for me to just sense that Bayamim Hahem Bazman Hazeh type of reality. And okay, so here goes. I'll try to read slowly because I know I sometimes speak quickly. Dearest students, I hope all is well. Each year as Chanuka approaches, I remember the years of my life during which the Battle of Chanuka was most alive and complicated for me, my years in college. Being that you are currently traveling that part of the road of life, I'd like to share my thoughts and experiences so that you can benefit from them if they resonate with you. As I've mentioned to many of you, the experience of being in college was not a simple one for me. As one with an unquenchable thirst for knowledge, learning, and understanding, along with an insatiable appetite for religious and personal growth, being in an environment that felt like it put these elements at odds with each other was very challenging. After the initial shocking transition and then settling into a routine, along came the cold nights of December, with Hanukkah imminently hovering in the air. I distinctly recall the sensation of the deep, biting cold as I'd walk across the campus late at night on my way back from Mariv. I was surrounded by the tiny reddish glow of the cigarette butts of those walking past me on one side and the hugely vast statues of Greek goddesses on the other. Reminiscent of Yaakov praying Mariv as an assertion of the necessity and devout emunah to get through the long and challenging night ahead, I would make my way across that campus night after night, feeling confused and in the dark. While I genuinely believed in the importance and value of a strong secular education and regularly read articles by Rav Lichtenstein about the positive effects and that such knowledge can have on an individual in the realm of personal and religious growth, being surrounded by those statues just didn't feel right. The sculpture of Athena, Greek goddess of wisdom, represented so much more than just the quest for knowledge. It pointed to the supremacy of human intellect as the sole implement for understanding the world and what we do in it. The experience of being in an environment where that affirmation led many to turn away from their religious quest was a daunting one. Coming to terms with my environment and strategizing to take the good wisdom and learning from it without falling into the pitfalls that would take me off the path of my religious and personal journey was a perpetual process. My Hanukkah mission was to work on recognizing and appreciating the light that the college experience had to offer, while not allowing that light to blind me to the risks of the perpetual lurking darkness. The approach I developed was one that gave me outlets and tools to continue on my path of personal growth, despite, or perhaps with credit to, my environment. I focused my energies on fostering my connections with Hashem and with those who shared similar goals in his service. While at times I've divided my pursuits into neat categories of bein adam lechavero and bein adam lemakom, upon further contemplation, I think the borders between these realms is too fuzzy to maintain in terms of my religious and personal pursuits, and the realms largely overlap. Here are some of the things I did on and off campus while in college that helps me navigate the night-like elements of my years at Columbia. First and foremost, I took davening and learning really seriously. I went to Minyan 3 times a day, rain or shine. On days I had an early gym class that conflicted with even the early on-campus Minyan, or on Fridays on which I headed down to Sloan Kettering to donate platelets for cancer patients, I prayed at the local Ramat Ora synagogue a few blocks away. Why did I feel passionate about Tefillah B'tzibur, something which is beyond the realm of my technical responsibilities as a Jewess? At the time, the Rav's ideas about the potency of communal prayer, along with the fact that communal prayer afforded the opportunity to partake in more components of the liturgy, were my official reasons for being so dedicated. Additionally, I knew that if I didn't have the structure of the time blocks in my schedule, my tefillah would be rushed and I'd be distracted. I loved having time carved out for talking to Hashem and appreciated that it was there even when I wasn't in the mode to focus on the words I was saying. The fact that the time was in my schedule meant I would be able to more fully take advantage of it at times that I was in the mindset to do so. In retrospect, I think there were at least two other compelling reasons that kept me running to shul. One is the fact that it meant that I spent time with others who were like-minded, which certainly has its value, even when one is involved in the pursuit of being part of a diverse, multicultural community. The other is that it was a real commitment that made me feel like I was prioritizing my relationship with Hashem. At a time in my life where I was sure to show up to every class, because I saw the potential for learning and intellectual growth, I innately felt that I had to make time for classes with Hashem to have those slots scheduled for religious and personal growth. This value brings me to my steadfast commitment to Talmud Torah. During most semesters, I scheduled a daily 4-hour Seder. I reasoned that if students on the rugby team were practicing for 4 hours a day, there was no reason I couldn't learn for that long. After years of balancing a dual curriculum and lots of extracurricular activities, I believed I could handle fitting in those hours, considering how few hours were actually spent in class. What about all the endless hours of readings and coursework, you may ask? Even if I would have spent every waking minute in the library reading, I wouldn't have been able to do it all. I prioritized and realized that doing a little less reading was worth it to enable me to grow in my knowledge of Torah and keep my relationship with my tradition and my creator pulsating, exciting, and really alive. I loved learning Torah, and it felt like my opportunities to do so fueled me for the challenges of being on campus. Aside from learning on my own or in classes, I made sure to have different types of chavrutot. Over the years, there were two that really stand out. One was really intellectually stimulating and challenging, and it was such a great feeling to experience that brain strain in the context of Torah. It would have not felt right for all of my passion for intellectual and analytical stimulation to be coming from and satisfied by my academic secular pursuits, though I did see them as religious in nature as well. The other chavruta was with someone who I really look up to as a beacon of religious light and conviction. And learning with her gave me the opportunity to talk and think about where I really stood in my relationship with Hashem. It was an opportunity to make sure I wasn't stagnating or falling into a routine devoid of proactive searching. Such opportunities to hang out with like-minded, growth-oriented individuals were really critical for me, not only in a learning chavruta context, but in a social one as well. I made time to hang out with people who shared the same values, both from my campus and from elsewhere. Maintaining relationships with old friends who maintained similar goals was very edifying, inspirational, and comforting. Furthermore, I made it a priority to stay in touch with teachers and role models from high school and Israel who knew me well and understood the path I had chosen. I felt that as I was navigating the stormy seas of the college experience, leaving an anchor with them and periodically looking back to assess if I was indeed still headed on the path I had set forth for myself was really helpful. It provided the opportunity and perspective to be totally honest with myself regarding where I was headed. I really appreciated their support and the insights they offered. Finally, I made sure to be involved in doing good things for other humans and Jews. Aside from the fact that leaving campus and having other experiences provided a most welcome breath of fresh air, it was important to me to feel like there was a life beyond school. While I did a bunch of random things like donating platelets regularly, sleeping in a homeless shelter, teaching in Harlem, and organizing a Yachat Shabbaton on campus, my most invigorating and regular commitment was to NCSY in upstate New York. I spent many of my weekends with great friends on the roads that led out of the city, staring out the windows for hours at the beautiful trees, marveling at their life cycle throughout the seasons, and contemplating my own. I found it to be the perfect outlet for getting out of the city, having a great time with quality people, and making a difference in the lives of wonderful, out-of-town individuals with varying levels of religious knowledge and experience. When I wrote the description of what it felt like for me to be in college at the beginning of this letter, the feelings of tension, anxiety, and darkness pervaded me. However, now as I sit here after enumerating different things I did to light up the experience, I'm smiling inside as I relive the good times I created for myself. I feel truly blessed to have taken myself to task that first Hanukkah on campus and to have figured out what worked for me to make those years ones that were filled with light. May Hashem bless each of you this Hanukkah season with the strength, clarity, and passion to discover your own paths and be proactive about bringing light into your lives and relationships with Hashem and with all those around you. Then I signed my name. So that was my first letter. It's been interesting for me on my trajectory of being a Jewish woman and mother, and to notice how let's say it this way. I feel like the roads and the paths that we travel to access Hashem, to come closer to Hashem, to connect deeply to our own spirituality, to our higher purpose, to having clarity about what unique light of God we're meant to share in this world. I feel like the paths we travel in order to do that, for me as a woman, is something that very much is not stagnant. As someone who really does love and care deeply about Talmud Torah, and Tefillah, as you heard, it's something that was always interesting for me growing up. And challenging, the fact that growing up I attended Yeshiva Flatbush for high school. I had a wonderful high school experience. There was a minyan that, thank God, I was blessed to be able to attend my senior year, because we lived in Queens, and my parents arranged for there to be an early van to get the Queens. My brother started attending that year, Flatbush as well, and the condition was we need the option of getting to minyan. And I loved Tefillah B'Tzibur, I loved Talmud Torah. And those were paths that were well traveled for me in terms of accessing Hashem, like really the scenic route, like the beautiful bike path with the flowers and like the nice smells and the wind in your face, like really very enjoyable for me. I feel super blessed to be a wife and a mother of amazing kids. I have to say that parenting is far more challenging for me than being a student. And I am so grateful for that challenge, because I feel like it has brought to tremendous growth. And I hope to continue to grow tremendously from the experience. It was like a moment a very long time ago. My oldest just turned 20, thank God. Like recognizing that trajectory of those well-traveled paths that I love to travel to access God, we're like not like there was a roadblock there. Right when when I was pregnant with my oldest, I was living in Cliffside Park, New Jersey, and we were traveling down to I was traveling to New York every day to study in the program now known as GPATS. And I remember during my pregnancy already making during Slichot, she was born in November. I remember attending Slichot. I would take the Bergen Line buses for any people from that part of town. Bergen Line buses over the George Washington Bridge, daven at the bridge shul, like when it was still dark outside when we started during Slichot season. And like remembering and thinking of like, okay, so I'm going to bring my daughter with me to minyan. And days, months, weeks, years later, it wasn't happening. Minyan is not a regular feature of my life 3 times a day. And it was work for me to recognize that those paths of Talmud Torah and Tefillah were not an end in and of themselves, rather a means to an end of serving Hashem. And I'm not going to go through all the vignettes now, but that notion of forging other paths to, in my service of Hashem, taking the path certainly less taken by me up to that point in my life, and maybe more traveled by others. What felt to me like the equivalent of, let's say, a path through the desert, in contrast to like the lush bike path with the flowers. That choice to become curious about the journey, and to recognize that that the way we serve God are means to the end of serving God, as opposed to ends and an end in and of themselves, was something that I really worked on and really came to love and appreciate. Like, I mean, I know it's a metaphor, but in real life, I also really love the desert. I have to say that the path of parenting is not quite like the desert for me in my home. And in that journey of clarifying for myself that, the fact that I was not chayv in Talmud Torah and it was not chayv in Tefillah B'tzibur meant that I had to always be brutally honest with myself about how can I really be serving God as best as I can right now. And there was this, there were a bunch of moments, but there was one of them was when I had signed that teaching at Nishmat. Those years that I was teaching here was real. I'm always very, very inspired by my students. Very inspired by my students in all sorts of ways, and just hearing about all their learning, even though I was teaching, like, it's not the same as doing my own learning. I just felt such a deep yearning, and was when I think maybe when after my third or fourth child was born, and I was like, that's it, I'm clearing out my schedule and I am scheduling a day for learning. And I did. I joined a learning program. It was lovely in many ways. It left me feeling very, very frustrated in others. I'm like an iyun type of person. I'd rather spend many, many hours on a few lines than use those hours to cover breadth. I prefer depth. It's how my mind is wired. And it just felt like such a tease. I was just so frustrated. Like, it just felt like such a little taste. I didn't have other time to be investing in my learning. The following year, I started off in the same learning program, and then I was just honest with myself and recognizing that really at that point in my life, it was so important, and still now, it's so important for me to have energy to really show up for my kids and parent them the way that I feel is like my responsibility and privilege as a mother. And if a day that I was carving out for myself was leaving me feeling more drained than nurtured, then I was doing something wrong. And I started doing pottery on a rooftop studio in Nachlaot, and like, it's really what I needed. And that place of wrapping my mind around that identity, like the place of like, wait, how could I be using time to be doing pottery instead of learning Torah, was like a transition that took me a while. Following on the heels of that transition, I, thank God, had the clarity that I was really in need of a sabbatical to really just take more time to do those types of creative things on my own. That was about 6 years ago. I think that a bunch of things prompted it. I think part of it was working through Julia Cameron's book called The Artist's Way. Julia Cameron is not Jewish, but she's a deeply spiritual person, I would say. And the book The Artist's Way is a 12-week plan to help people connect to their creativity. I do feel like I'm a creative person, and I don't know what really pulled me toward that book. But I did the work of the book. I actually did it with a group, and I don't know if I can directly correlate to that, but that work on connecting more deeply to myself and seeing what light I had to share with the world really led to me taking more time off to be nurturing myself in other ways. And it was in that context that I wrote the following. This was already written during that sabbatical year from teaching. Different tone than the previous letter, also a Chanuka letter. Okay, here goes. Dear students, thinking of you as Chanuka rapidly approaches. I hope the past few months have been going well for all of you, filled with presence, fulfillment, aspiration, and achievement. You're each up to very different things in life, even if you're technically in similar places. And I know that the first few months of the academic year, whether one is in school or not, can be a time of adjustment, which can sometimes be very overwhelming and challenging. I hope that Chanuka, with its unique position of the year, marking a time in the dark winter when we usher in light, indeed is a time of reflection and opportunity for appreciating all the blessings in your lives. Baruch Hashem, I've been really enjoying my year. It's been really lovely taking time to do things that are nurturing and that I really enjoy. As much as I enjoy being with people, I didn't realize how critical it is for me to have alone time, and I feel like I, and by extension, my family, are reaping the benefits of this gift. I attended a Rosh Chodesh learning/writing workshop a month ago. It's fun to be able to do such things that were just not options when I was working 3 nights a week. And one of the participants made a fascinating point. She said that we always talk about giving to other people, but when we talk, but we call it taking when it's for ourselves. The semantic switch from taking time for ourselves to giving time to ourselves is really very significant and can really shift our perspective on how we're using our time. I'm glad I've given this year to myself and bless each of you with the ability, technically and emotionally, to give yourselves the gift of self-nurturing in the doses you need and that work for you at whatever point in your life you find yourself. It can be something as simple as preparing a lovely cup of steaming herbal tea or hot chocolate and taking the time to watch the steam swirl magically and majestically as you enjoy the multi-sensory experience of being with a hot cup of soothing beverage, or gifting yourselves with a really fun pair of gloves or socks to help keep you toasty warm. Julia Cameron in the Artist's Way, which I feel like I've written about before in this forum, speaks of engaging in acts that fill the well. This Hanukkah season, I think of them as filling the oil jug. We're all made of different stuff. And for some, the notion of taking time to do nice things for oneself may seem natural and obvious, whereas the notion of reaching outside of oneself to help others may be the challenge. For others who have been hardwired to give to others, the notion of wasting time and or money on oneself is something that seems vain, sinful, and antithetical to the value of giving. The metaphor of oil that is to be lit is something that helps me concretize this notion. In order for one to be able to pour out oil for others to light, one must first make sure that one's own vessel isn't cracked and leaky, and that indeed there's enough oil in it to be able to pour out to others. This act of filling our own jugs, hopefully wholesomely and satisfyingly, metaphorically going out there to do a masik and get the olives off the trees and press them ourselves, is something that is wonderfully connecting to God and his creation in its own right, bringing a tremendous sense of wonder and gratitude. When one is filled in that way, one is able to share that potential light with others. So just continue with the oil metaphor for a minute. Whether we teach in a Sunday school, are advisors for a youth group, or just plain have people in our lives who we care about deeply, there are times that we feel like we have certain light, the light of Torah, of wellness, of perspective, etc., that we want to share with someone else who we feel could so desperately benefit from what we have to share with them. I think the metaphor we often think of is kindling, transmitting from our fire to them. I want to suggest a different metaphor, one that I feel is more on target. I think that what one is sharing in that case is not the flame. If it were the flame, something about that image as a metaphor makes me uncomfortable. The one being lit has little degree of free will in the matter and can do little to protect that new light when it's windy out there. It also puts a lot of pressure and accountability on the one lighting for results of fire, heat, and warmth when there's so little that can be done by the lighter to preserve such results. I prefer the image of the transmission of oil, pouring from one hopefully full, brimming vessel into another. That other vessel has its own unique shape and qualities, and the oil, a liquid, will be its same self in content, but will take the distinct shape of its container. That's the foundation of what enables light. But it's the bearer of that second unique vessel who will have to take note if their vessel is even suitable to hold that oil, and if it isn't, to take the steps to do repairs. Once the vessel is capable of holding oil in its unique fashion, the bearer of the vessel needs to choose what type of wick to put into it if hoping to generate light. Lots of decisions: what material to use, how to prepare it, how long to soak it in the oil, how much to submerge it, are all in the hands of the bearer of that second vessel. And ultimately, whether or not and when to light that wick is solely in the hands of that recipient. If we're honest, we're all always on both ends of that kind of relationship. We have so much to give others and are also so thirsty to receive from others. I invite you to think about that oil metaphor in terms of those relationships and see what comes up for you. Are you trying too hard to light someone else's fire? If you take a step back and reframe, does it shift the pressure when you acknowledge that all you can really do is provide oil? Are you trying too hard to be around others who will light you? Are you able to take responsibility for that yourself, acknowledging that it's ultimately in your hands to use the oil you've gotten from others and light it yourself? Are you willing to put in the hard work of commitment to keep that flame nurtured, to make sure the wick is absorbent, to keep the oil supply sufficient? And if you're lighting in windy conditions where candles often blow out, are you prepared to build a glass box around your flame to protect it from the elements, or to move the light to less windy spaces? These are not always easy or comfortable questions to address. With the oil metaphor, it really puts the ball in one's own hands to light the flame and keep it ignited. It's no longer something that someone else lit, which may just as well go out once it gets windy. If it's something we've done ourselves with the foundation we've been given, we can honestly ask ourselves if we're willing to nurture and maintain it and enable it to thrive. And in terms of everyone else's flames that we wish were ignited and steady, we can let go of expectation and just provide the oil, trusting and praying that each person in their own way and in their own time will have the means to light themselves. I think I may have cut off the ends of the letter, but I'll leave that one at that. I'm pretty sure that those thoughts bubbled up for me on one of my runs. That's another thing I was inspired by one of my students to start doing many years ago. Not sure how many, many, is to start running. And it started really on a lower burner, and then went to a higher burner, and now it's back on a low flame, but certainly something that is important for me to do consistently. I just felt like I needed to be getting out, and that felt like a good, healthy way to be getting out. And something that I really loved about my running, I forgot who said this. I heard a quote once, I forgot the name of who, that their mind doesn't move unless their feet are moving. And I don't always feel that in life, but there's something about running that had my feet were just a motor for just like stuff to bubble up. I felt like the experience of living was like throwing ingredients into a pot, and the experience of running was like turning on the flame, letting things cook, and like seeing what, like really literally what was bubbling up. At a certain point, I chose to start writing, like in my mind, I think of them as notes on the run. There was a time that I was trying to write a letter to my students monthly about thoughts that came up on my runs. This one is from last year. It's the letter that I wrote to my students for the month of Cheshvan, Mar Cheshvan, which just ended about 8 days ago. It's still the same season, meaning it's a different month, different energy of the month. And that being said, what I describe in the letter has a lot to do with the weather. And actually here yesterday was the first day that actually felt like the weather that aligns with these sentiments. And it's also about light. So I'm going to share this one as well. One second. Yeah, these are all different angles. So just, yeah. Welcome to my life. Okay. This one has a title, Silver Linings. I love, basically I would write an email content to my students of like, how are you doing? All of that. And then I would put these notes on the run as an attachment. Okay. Silver linings. I love seeing the sunrise. Something about it moves me profoundly, and catching it is my favorite way to start the day. Most mornings this time of year, I try to catch it while I pray. There was a morning, though, that for various reasons, I decided to run then instead. My living room window offers a great view of the sunrise, but my typical running route just has two spots that afford a view of that part of the horizon. As I got to the entrance of a neighborhood with a circular loop of sidewalk that I usually run to the right, I realized that if I went that way, I'd miss the sun. It happened to also have been one of the first cloudy mornings of the season, and there's nothing like the magnificent scene of a cloud-filled sunrise. I really didn't want to miss it, and as I know that each one is a one-time show, and it had been so long since there was a cloud in the morning sky. So I chose to go left instead of right to arrive at the right part of the route before it was too late. As I approached the said location, I realized that I had missed seeing the sun pop up from behind the horizon. but it was hiding behind a very low cloud, emanating a warm glow and lining the cloud with an exceptionally pronounced and magnificent silver lining. I was deeply moved. Immediately, the song composed to Rav Kook's words about this month of Mar Cheshvan started playing in my head. Kishehaneshama me'ira, gam shamayim otei arafel, mefikim or naim. When one's soul is illuminating, even the cloud-filled skies emanate a pleasant light. I began to ponder what it is about this cloudy, overcast weather that makes people typically feel down, and what ways we can see to it that our soul is illuminating. The seasonal down is clinically recognized in some as seasonal affective disorder with the appropriate acronym SAD. It seems that less sun and more clouds and wetness really just affects some people. I wonder, though, if there's also the component of struggling to get into and maintain a relatively monotonous routine after the tshuva-driven intensity of Elul, followed by the roller coaster adventure of the Tishrei holidays. While there are challenges with lacking routine, the other side of the same coin is the challenge that presents when there is only routine. Finding ways to integrate spontaneity into otherwise monotonous stretches and structure into times that are inherently chaotic is a struggle, but certainly bears fruits. For me, going left that day and switching up my routine is what enabled me to see really inspirational light and helps me internalize it and make it my own. Silver linings are a powerful metaphor. We only get to witness and enjoy them when the weather or our life circumstances appear otherwise gloomy. Ironically, the summer that lacks structure for many actually has pretty consistent cloudless skies most days, whereas Mar Cheshvan, without any holidays or vacations, is typified by skies that are so varied from one minute to the next. We can always choose to tap into intrinsic elements of either structure or spontaneity when feeling overwhelmed by the sense of enormity of the other one. May the stability and routine of this time of year be grounding and serve as fertile, solid foundation for exploring and experimenting in ways that break up the monotony and enable us to connect with the inner light of our soul and emanate it outward in peace and joy. So yeah, these days are not particularly, I don't think of them as being particularly monotonous. There's a lot going on. I'm gonna share three other short thoughts that are coming up for me. One is that I just want to share that this whole sunrise thing, I have found that for me personally, that is what I need these days. Baruch Hashem, B'li Ayin Hara, like I think since the war started, I don't think I've missed a sunrise. And even if I don't see it peek up from the horizon because there's a cloud or because I'm a few minutes late with starting my davening, it just fuels me. It fills me for the day. And I've been thinking a lot, especially there have been some clear skies and clear mornings, but even when the days are clear, often in the morning, there's some gorgeous clouds and they pick up that light in such magnificent ways. Like I feel like watching Hashem's cloud art is just so deeply moving for me. And seeing that light in such a tangible way, even when there are clouds, is just gives me so much hope. That poetry reading that I mentioned in the beginning, Yoshua November's poems had a lot to do with revealed and concealed. He writes about Kabbalah, he references Kabbalah. And the sunrise that I saw the morning after that poetry reading was one of those, like, you saw the light because of the clouds. Like you only see those rays, the rays that people, like to draw or photograph when there's a cloud there. It doesn't happen otherwise. And there's something so painful about that. And there's something so beautiful about that. And it's something that I deeply, deeply appreciate these days. That connects to like my favorite Chanuka Dvar Torah is connected. I'm just deeply moved. I'm deeply moved by nature, and it's connected to that. I forgot who, but somebody asked the question. Sorry, not great with remembering those types of details. The question of if there was enough oil to burn for one day, then why was Hanukkah? Why do we celebrate for 8 days? Like one day was natural. Like there were only 7 days of miracles. And I believe that somebody wrote a sefer with like 100 or 101 answers to that question. The one that moves me deeply is the humility to recognize that oil burning is actually miraculous. It's a miracle that we're used to. It's a miracle that we can call natural. It's a miracle that we can explain by the laws of whatever we use to explain things. But it's amazing. One of my students pointed out last year, I love having my students over. I teach in a bunch of places. One of the places I have them over on Hanukkah. So I'll provide the food for the body, you provide food for the soul, and I ask them to share their Hanukkah Divrei Torah. One of my students pointed out that it really is so interesting that olive oil comes from olives. Oil is very, very different than water or dirt or earth. And again, I'm sure the botanists amongst us can explain really well how this happens, but it really is pretty mind-blowing that that oil comes from olives that grow on a tree that grew nurtured in dirt and by water. And it's reminiscent of the story of Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa in the Talmud, where his daughter had accidentally brought home vinegar from the market instead of oil to light the Shabbos candles. And she was very distraught because vinegar doesn't burn. And Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa said to her, like, no worries. Misha Amar L'Shemen v'yidlak, Yomer L'chometz v'yidlak. Like whoever said, God who makes oil burn can make vinegar burn as well. And this notion of recognizing that nature is miraculous is something that I really am blown away by. I just really find nature to be deeply, deeply moving. The Ramban, in the last commentary in Parshat Bo, which is part of what's written in the Mezuzah about Yetziat Mitzrayim, asked the question of why. I'm sorry, I don't have a source sheet here for you, but if anyone wants sources, you can email me at adibitter@gmail.com, adibitter@gmail.com. So the Ramban asked, why is it that we have so many mitzvot Zechel Yetziat Mitzrayim? We remember Kiddush is Zechel Yetziat Mitzrayim. We're supposed to remember Yetziat Mitzrayim every day. Haggadah, the Magid, lots of mitzvot Zechel Yetziat Mitzrayim. Like, what was the big deal? And he says that was the time that Hashem made miracles that went against the laws of nature and were really blatant. But the fact that, like, throughout generations, we have people who doubt God's existence, it's part of the nature of faith, is that it's not something that can be proven. God doesn't start making miracles right and left all the time to just convince all the people who don't believe in God's existence. God did it then. We remember that. And we live in a natural world. We live in a natural world where it too really is miraculous. And I'll just share one of the miracles that with all of the deep pain and difficulty of what's going on with this war. I find it gives me tremendous hope to see all things positive, to see all the positive things, not to see all things as meaning some things are just really painful. But in terms of the positivity, thank God there was an amazing miracle that happened to one of the members of our kihila, in our community. The young man is a soldier, and he was in Gaza. I'm not going to go through his whole story. A sniper shot him in the neck. The bullet came out the other side. The next week, he was in shul on Friday night, and like they did an evening of hoda'ah / tefillah, where he told his story, standing up there, walking everything, and this is a few days after his mother was called by the IDF to gather the family and to go see him in the hospital in a way that was conveyed that it may be parting from him. They didn't even know if he was alive. It's not medically possible, and thank God he's okay. He's fine. It's crazy for a bullet to go through from one side to the other side of the neck. He's not paralyzed. He's walking around. Apparently, the bullet hit. It knocked off a chip of bone from C6, one of the vertebrae. So he has some like tingling and pain in his hands that he said is getting better each day. But like even in like he spoke and each of his parents spoke, it was very moving. Even in sterile conditions of an operating room table, his father said like the chances of going through from one side to the other without causing any harm is insanely miraculous. And that place of gratitude is something that I find gives me tremendous strength. And saying Psuke de Zimra with the sunrise and just remembering that with all the difficult things that are going on, there is so much to be grateful for in our lives. And I feel it on the macro sense with what we're going through now, and I am blessed to feel it on a micro sense. I'll just end with this thought. This whatever, I don't know if it's a thought. I'll share the following. There was a period in which I spent a while for a medical issue, hospitalized in Hadassah in Karim. And thank God I was able-bodied and able-spirited, and despite the fact that I had to be there for like a medical treatment, I was able to go to Minyan. It was like I appreciate God's sense of humor. I was having like right before it was a rather challenging time with my kids, and I called out to my husband like, I need a vacation, and like my husband is wonderful and supportive and great, but like it's not like I went to book a vacation because I have my life, but God was like, you're right, you do need a vacation. We'll check you into pastoral Ein Karim for a few weeks. And it was great. I mean, thank God. It was very nice to be able to daven with the minyan. And someone else making sandwiches for my kids in the morning, and the synagogue there is beautiful, the Chagall windows, the stained glass, beautiful place. And davening with people who are dealing with intensity in life is always, for me, inspirational and uplifting. At the end of the davening, the gabbai would read some halachot, and then he said, and now we'll say Tehillim. And we would say Prakim Kuf Chaf Aleph and Kuf Lamed, 121 and 130, the book of Psalms, which are traditional prayers that we say in times of need, the Shir Lamalot, Asanai El Harim, Man Yavo Ezri, turning to God for support. And Shir Lamalot Mimamakim Karticha Hashem, calling out to God from the depths. And he said, we'll say these too for all the people, in and out of the hospital who need salvation, redemption, healing, etc. And then he said, and now we'll say Mizmor Kuf, Psalm 100, which is Mizmor L'Todah. It's a short psalm of gratitude. And he said to thank God for all of the blessings in our life, the things that we know about and the things that we don't. And that was something that I found so deeply moving and resonant and true. And I find that I in my life, I've adopted this both ways. If I'm having, let's say, a frustrating, difficult moment with one of my kids or whatever it is, or even small things like, being overwhelmed by laundry, which is like, I just remind myself, like I dive into Hashem for help with like dealing with the acuteness of whatever is overwhelming for me in that moment. And then I say Mizmor L'Todah. I just remind myself, what a blessing to have a family, what a blessing to have a washing machine, what a blessing to have laundry, what a blessing to have people to be doing laundry for. And it's true. I don't find it to be apologetic. I find it to be true. And if I stop in my moments of difficulty and I remember to turn to God for help and to appreciate the blessings in my life, I find that gives me tremendous hope and perspective. And on the flip side, even the small things like finding a parking spot, which, having lived in New York City for a while, actually without having a car, but with relatives who have lived in New York City with a car, there it's like really like, wow, mamish feels like an ace galoi. But even like this morning, like finding a parking spot close to where I am, I just say Mizmor L'Todah. I'm just grateful. I'm grateful for the little things in life. And I feel like noticing those little things in life gives so much strength. And I remember in that moment to also say a parak, or it's the two Shir Hamalot Prakim, for all the people who are doing things far less mundane than finding parking, that really, really need help, whether they're dealing with emotional breakdowns in their own corners of their own homes that nobody knows about, or they're on the front lines in Gaza or wherever they are. So many people need our prayers. And the place of focusing on gratitude is something that I feel we owe to ourselves, we owe to God, and really does give tremendous hope and light. Yeah. Thank you for those who have been here. I'm happy to hear your thoughts, feedback, etc. You're welcome to email me at dbitter@gmail.com. May we all be blessed to really feel God's light in the world, and to lidayek, become, I don't know if it's multilingual or non-lingual, but to really be precise and clear, and to find those places within ourselves to kind of align ourselves to shine God's unique light. We are to be conduits for the unique angle of God's light that each of us has to bring into the world, each one unique as our fingerprints. May we be blessed to be those conduits, and to live life in a way that we can appreciate light, even when it is the silver linings that are accompanied by darkness. Have a wonderful day or night. May we hear B'surot Tovot. Bye.